Good morning and thank you for joining us live here. We're looking at the Flow Hive apiary and we're having a look in the hives, looking around for a bit of honey to harvest so we can show you just what it looks like coming out of the hive. Now, as you can see in this window, there's not that many bees in this hive, but there is quite a lot of honey. So the numbers have dropped for some reason and we're going to need to get into the brood box and have a look at that. We won't be doing the brood inspection today. It's been a bit of a rainy morning. Though it's clearing up, which is nice. But we might just harvest a little bit of honey, leave the rest for the bees, because if we have a look at the back window here, you can see that the bees are a little hungry. This window tells a story. It's a cross-section of what's going on. And as the bees fill up, they usually fill up from the center out towards the extremities. But then they'll start eating honey away when they're hungry. And you can see that pattern here, how there's full cells and then suddenly empty, and then full again and suddenly empty. So we certainly wouldn't be harvesting a whole lot of honey today. So we're going to need you to mute.
We're getting a little bit of feedback.
There we go, Leah. We're hearing the audio again. So Leah's going to be answering the questions, or reading out your questions rather, and Mira, my sister, and myself will be answering them live. So if you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer them. And also, if you've got answers to other people's questions, then chime in. That's what it's all about. Okay. So what I'm doing is putting the key in and just giving it a little turn like that. And what's happening is channels are forming inside the comb for the honey to flow down to the bottom. And we can see we've got a lot of capping on this one, so we're happy that there's going to be some good honey in that frame. You can see the bees are still on the surface of the comb there. Haven't really noticed a whole lot as yet, but as time goes on, they'll notice that the honey's kind of disappearing from beneath their feet. So you can just see the honey coming down now.
It's starting.
And it's going to be filling the jar here. Beautiful. So as said, if you've got any questions, put them in the comments. We'll get to answering those. The whole idea is just to help you get started in beekeeping, so don't be afraid to ask. Look at the honey just about to fall into the jar.
It's funny, it never gets old. I feel like it's hundreds of times that we've done this. I still get excited.
So that's my sister Mira behind the camera. We will take turns today, and if you've got questions for Mira, then you can ask her. She has a wealth of knowledge. She's the one that does almost all of our amazing macro and slow-mo bee photography, and she's a complete wealth of knowledge in beekeeping now. She's doing a lot of breeding up of bees. She's turned 2 hives into how many now in the last 6 months?
I've got in the last under 2 years since I started with 2 colonies, and now I've got close to 30, including Nukes.
That's great. That's great. So she's just been splitting away and breeding queens, and even selling some queens now. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Can
Beautiful.
I try it? I want to try it. We got any questions, Leah?
Oh, we do. They've started coming in. So Sue from the Hunter Valley says she's been seeing a covering of bees outside the hive. Is it because of the humidity and heat, as it only seems to happen on warm days?
Sorry, I was getting distracted on tasting. Oh, wow, that's incredible. Well, so the bearding definitely is happens on warm days and hot days, and essentially what's happening is the bees are getting out of the way. That's how I understand it. It's sort of like they're hanging out on the porch to make room for the bees that are inside, creating the bee air conditioning and cooling the hive down.
Yeah, it's all about ventilation. So if they've got a lot of bees, really healthy colony, you look in the windows and you can hardly see the comb, which is not like this hive, then they're really going to need to clear out if they want to get any kind of airflow going on a hot day. So that's what you're seeing at the front, perfectly normal. if you see a lot of bearding in the springtime, it could be a sign that they're going to swarm. The rest of the year, it would pretty unlikely. They're probably just clearing out to make some space for ventilation.
We also got Chuck tuning in. He's our ambassador in Arizona, and is wishing everyone a happy new year.
Oh, thanks, Chuck. Happy New Year
Chuck.
to you too.
Mark is asking, how long does it take to produce honey once you put the super on?
So that's a question that's got a long answer in a way. If your bees are really healthy and that happens to coincide with a good nectar flow, then things can happen very quickly. But often it doesn't happen like that, and perhaps your bees are waiting for the nectar flow, or perhaps the nectar flow comes and your bees are still trying to build up, and the whole thing can take longer. So it varies from people with these amazing stories of things happening in weeks to people getting no honey in an entire season. And it's all about just looking at the health of your colony, looking at the environment, and if you've got more than one hive, you can start benchmarking one hive against another one, and really getting to know how things work. It's yeah, so the answer is it varies widely, and you may need a bit of patience in order to get to this beautiful point of harvesting the honey, but hopefully things align for you and you get honey sooner.
Awesome. Naomi's asking, what sort of surface is the best place to place a hive?
So placing a hive is good if it's on a stable surface. So if you're in a garden like this and you've got our Flow Hive 2 or 2 Plus, then it's got these legs. Now under the mulch there, what we've done is we've put a paver just so it doesn't sink into the garden. So these legs are great because they allow it to level, but if you put it just on really soft garden soil, it's likely going to fall over as the hive gets heavy with honey. So just put something sturdy, a piece of wood or a paver or something like that, and that way it'll be a nice stable footing for your hive. If you've got our classic, then it needs a level surface to begin with. So you'll be putting some, perhaps a couple of big bricks down or something like that.
Sorry, getting distracted tasting honey again. Do you know what that is, Cedar? I don't know these
it's a beautiful
local
honey.
flavours here so well, because it definitely does taste a little bit like there's some paper bark in there. But what else? Like some gum.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a dark, almost caramelly.
You know, it's not jumping out as a flavour I recognise, and that's a wonderful thing, is as you go on, you learn more and more flavours about what's what. Start connecting more and more things, but this one, I can't tell, so there's more to learn.
Always more to learn with bees, isn't there? Any more questions, Leah?
Yeah, Michelle is asking, why are you taking the honey if the bees are hungry? Would it not be better to see what's going on in the brood box first?
It's a very valid question, and the reason we're taking a little bit of honey is because we want to show you. It's much nicer to watch a bit of honey, watch how the hive works, show people the honey flowing right out into the jar. And at the start we talked a little bit about that, saying we would just harvest one frame of honey and leave the rest for the bees. But you're quite right, the bees are a bit thin on the ground, and it's likely that they've just been through a queen change, and we need to monitor that and make sure there's nice levels of brood and that the bees will build up again. So if you see it like that and there's not as many bees in the window, then it's a good idea to do your brood inspection. So on the next nice day, we've had a few rain showers this morning, we'll get in there and make sure the queen is happy and healthy.
Yeah, and part of there being low bee numbers also is that I would say that, you know, there's maybe not quite enough bees to service that much honey either and to look after it. So removing a bit of that honey can actually be useful in terms of protection from small hive beetle. So yeah, we wouldn't do it if we weren't planning to go in on the next sunny day to check out what's actually going on. Look, I just found a drone on the ground. Poor little guy. I'm not sure.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that. We have a question from another Michelle. This Michelle is in Boston. She says, it's winter here. What are your recommendations regarding winter storage of the hives at a temperature below freezing?
Okay, so I had, up until recently, I was living in Berlin, and I had a couple of flow hives in a garden and one on my balcony there. And of course it gets far below freezing in that area. In the winter, what I would do is at the end of my summer harvest with my flow super, I'd remove the flow super, I'd harvest and I'd leave it a day or two for the bees to clean up all the sticky mess, and then usually by the time I pull it off, it was all dry, and I'd store that in a black plastic tub, so sealed but also in a shed, so out of the sunlight. And then during the autumn months, I'd let them collect the ivy honey into the brood box. If the hive was very strong, I might add a shallow on top so that they could fill that with extra honey stores. But essentially, I had a 10-frame brood box with four or so frames of honey, and that would last them through the winter months. So I did add some extra insulation in the roof. I added just some hessian bags just to add a little bit extra. In some places where there is really brutal winters, like in Canada, they do wrap the hives. Sometimes they also have hives in sheds already in Canada. A lot of people run them in sheds, but I had mine on the balcony and I had mine in the garden, and they both survived the winter really well just in their single brood box, providing they had lots of honey stores. Yeah, so it's totally possible. You just have to learn to manage, and I think the best way to learn to manage your bees in a particular area is to contact your local beekeepers. They don't have to have a flow hive. Any beekeeper that knows how to winter a beehive, it's the same process. You think this is just a honey super, it just happens to be the special flow honey super. But it's same principle applies. So yeah, definitely contact local, and it's so funny, like we have hives here and then hives at Cedar and I live just across the way, and there's a nectar flow here and there isn't down there. And so beekeeping is such a local experience. It's such a, yeah, you can't really, you have to learn from people around you, and that's a great part of beekeeping actually, the camaraderie and the enjoyment of sharing that bee knowledge with your beekeeping geek friends. We've got a little local group called Byron Bees, and a bunch of my mates and I all share our knowledge there, so it's a lot of fun.
Yes, there's no shortage of bee geeks. Naz has said, my bees have just cut the combs. Does this mean that it's ready for harvest?
The answer is yes. When the bees go through this amazing process of dewatering the nectar, they collect it from up to a 10-kilometre radius, and they bring that all back in. They then take the moisture out on their bodies, they fan it, they dry it, and they keep reducing it down till they decide that the moisture content is low enough, and that's got to be down below the 20%, usually around the 18% range of water content. And then what they'll do is they'll put their capping on, which you can see down here. A little bit hard to see in this particular hive because they've put a lot of wax around the place. But they put their wax capping on like a preserving jar to say we're happy that that honey is going to keep for some time ahead when they might need it. And lucky for us, they store more than they need usually, and we can share some too. So perfect time to harvest is when you can see that the capping's gone on the frame. Now if you're seeing capping in the side windows, you're seeing capping on the frame down here, then it's likely that the frame is capped most of the way through and it's ready to harvest. The other thing is, if you're watching a hive fill from the centre out and they're capping these centre ones and they're still filling these ones, then you can take some of the centre honey because they're in a filling pattern, they're moving out towards the extremities. But if it's the other way around and they're eating the honey away, then you could get into the scenario where you've got this pattern here, you can see they're eating honey away now. and they're likely to have eaten some honey away in the centre frames just above the brood nest too, which could mean they might be filling those cells with nectar again, and you get a higher moisture content. Not the end of the world if you harvest too early and you've got a high moisture content. Just means that that honey will ferment if it's left on the shelf too long. So you'll either need to consume it or keep it in the fridge before to make it last.
Or make honey mead.
Or make honey mead, yes, good idea.
Or just give it all to your family and friends. I love this.
But well done getting to that point where your hive is, that bees are capping the cells, and it's an exciting time getting ready to harvest.
It is very exciting. I love this, how we can see the different colours of nectar stored in this frame. You can actually see.
Isn't that cool?
Isn't that cool? That actually, even though bees generally will store a certain nectar type in one frame, so we actually get, but this must be, they've eaten some away and then they've started to fill it again.
Yes, very cool. We've got darks, very light there.
I know.
Very light honey there.
Very light honey.
And very dark in these other points. So that would be one of those two-tone you get sometimes where you see the streaks of different colours coming out of the honey tube. Pretty cool.
I love it when it does that.
Pretty cool.
We've got a question that's come in from Eddie. Eddie lives on a busy road where there's lots of dust and is wondering how this will affect a hive if it's placed in the front yard, or would it be better to place it in the backyard where there's still dust but not as much?
Okay, that's a good question. So I would say that the hive will be fine with the dust, because if you think about what the bees are doing, they're spreading themselves out over a 10 kilometre, so 6 mile radius and back again. So it's as much about that whole area as it is about where the hive is situated. So I would say your bees would be fine with the dust, but if you've got experience with dust, chime in and help answer the question. There's probably some things that would come before that in situating your hive as a priority, as in placing your hive with the flight path so it's not likely to bother anyone who's going to walk straight past the flight path. So just for those say 3 metres in front of your hive, the bees are flying up and away, and you don't want to get into the situation where you've put it pointing right at where people often walk, because bees can then get stuck in people's hair and so on. And so that might be a bigger factor than whether it's more dusty on the roadside.
Great. I wouldn't have known how to answer that one, so that's good to have that knowledge. Catherine's in England and is wanting to know if she can have a hive on an average sized garden.
So certainly. So if we've planted a whole lot of flowers here, which is great, but it's not actually going to change the honey harvest we get. We like to plant flowers actually because it really encourages all of these native bee species in, because there's 20,000 native bee species that really need looking after, and they often have a very small radius, as in they might only go a few hundred metres, and they need stepping stones, especially across our urban landscape where we've taken so much habitat away. So planting flowers is great, and it's also fun to watch your bees foraging on them, but it's more about what's happening in your 6 miles, 10 kilometre radius around your hive that'll change your honey crop. So if you've got forest around, if you've got urban areas where people plant lots of flowers, then you're likely to get a lot of honey coming in, and it'll pulse as the seasons go. Also, cropping areas can have big crops of things as well. So most places there's actually great honey, and it's amazing people keeping bees in the city do very well just from the myriad of different things that people plant. They get a great variety in a very long season.
Yeah, well, I kept bees on a balcony in Berlin. My balcony was only about, a couple of metres long by a metre wide, and I kept a colony there and had great harvest. In the spring we got wildflowers and blossoms, and in the summer we got the linden trees. Cedar's just rescuing a little bee there.
When the bees are hungry, they're more likely to come and investigate the honey jar. So what I'm going to do is put that right back on the landing board.
Yeah. Let her sisters clean her up.
And she'll get cleaned up just fine. Oh, she's decided she wants to stay with us here.
Off you go, girl. She's like, nah, I'm staying.
No, the honey was a good thing.
Yeah. So yeah, she just came to investigate and fell in, so we rescued her out. And maybe to stop more of that happening, should we put our little...
Putting a cover on, having a piece of kitchen wrap, or this is like one of those honeybee wraps where you've got the wax and oils and a piece of organic cotton for wrapping your food up in. They work really cool to stop the bees. You can just put it right around the jar like that. But there's not a whole lot of activity here, so we can probably leave that off for the moment and just keep an eye on it. If the bees start rubbing, you definitely want to put some kind of cover.
Yeah. And
we have a question from Rafiq, who's wondering if we feed the bees.
Okay, that's probably best answered by Mira. I don't tend to feed the bees, but she's been breeding bees lately, so she's actually been accelerating their growth.
Yeah, so feeding, I tend to go, so like say in Berlin, leading up to the winter, and I have a colony that's maybe a little bit light on their honey stores. Some beekeepers will take all the honey and then feed sugar. Other beekeepers like myself, I would only feed sugar when it needed, when the colony was light or weak. And so recently we've had a very wet summer and there's been a big dearth here, so there's nothing much around. The bees are all in the hives eating, and I had a lot of what I call mating nukes, where I was rearing queens, and they were just little colonies, 4 or 5 frames of bees, and they had no food. So instead of my bees starving, I chose to give them to sugar syrup. But as soon as there's a nectar flow coming in now, so I've stopped feeding them. So it's a balance. It's like we're trying to look after the bees the best we can. If they don't have the resources around and they need help, then feeding sugar is a really useful tool. But it's definitely a personal choice. But yeah, in the winter, in the autumn, if you want your hive to get through winter and it's a bit light, feeding is really important so they survive. So that's my, oh, hang on, we've had another little girl go for a dive.
Okay. Maybe we do need to keep that cover on.
We might need to keep that cover on. Oh, she's crawling back out. Oh, no.
So some great questions here this morning.
Yeah, thanks for all the awesome questions.
Keep them coming in, and if you've got answers to people's questions, then please chime in. That's what it's all about, helping each other learn. And it's fantastic to see the community out there answering so many questions. Soon I won't need to answer any at all.
Wouldn't you love that?
Steve has written in and says he's harvested twice now, where each time he got 2.5 kilograms of honey from each frame. But when he did that, no honey was actually shown at the front of the hive in the frames. It
sometimes can happen where a colony will be reluctant to fill those end frames. Every colony is different, and I've seen it a number of times. But more often they fill to the end, but every now and then you'll find a colony that just is reluctant to fill to the end. I think sometimes maybe that's, what would you say, Cedar, in terms of reasonings for that?
Yeah, we did have one hive amongst all of our hives that was like that. It just wouldn't fill to the end, and for whatever reason. But you could see in the side windows that they were full, and you could even sort of peer in down through here and get an idea that they were full as well.
Yeah.
So it's possible that that's happening to you, but it's also possible that the nectar flow is just not strong enough and they're not filling to the extremities, but they are getting some nice honey stored in the centre.
We have a great question that's come in from Christina. Christina's in Paris and says, I'm about to harvest my first frame of honey tomorrow. But my question is about manipulating the brood frames within a hive. I have a flow too, therefore I have 1 brood box and 1 super. I've been told that if the brood box is getting full, the conventional beekeepers will put a frame of brood up into the super and perhaps an empty foundation frame in the brood box to give the queen more room to lay eggs. She can't do this. She's wondering how you suggest she manipulates the brood box.
Okay, so if you're trying to make space in the brood box, which is typically a springtime thing, or the other one is where you're cycling old wax out. So they're the two reasons. One is to make space to limit the swarming tendencies. The other one is to cycle old wax out of the brood nest. So if your hive's still filling and they're busy filling up, and it may be the case that you just leave it for the moment, then either in the springtime do your spring management and free up some space in the brood nest. But the way you do that when you've got naturally drawn frames like we tend to do, you can go either way. You can put your foundation in, or you can just let the bees draw it themselves. I like to let the bees draw it themselves for a bunch of reasons. But if you have got the naturally drawn frames, then you can simply, as you're doing your inspection, pull the frame up, shake the bees off, cut out with your hive tool or a knife the comb. You can take that away to enjoy it and put the frame straight back in, and that bees have a totally fresh start, which does help in the springtime. Now you'd only do that if it was honey. Typically there's honey on the edges. So if you're trying to remove an old frame, it's got old dark wax and you want to cycle it out, then move it to the edge first, wait a while till all the brood has emerged, then you can take that away, cut it out, put the frame back. If you've got foundation, you'll need to prepare a frame and do a swap with the other one. So there's a few options there. Now if you get into a situation where you really want to take a frame out for some reason, but there's just a little bit of brood in it and you don't want to wait any longer, you could decide just to put it under the roof and wait a few more days for that brood to emerge from that frame. Now, if you're going to do that, you want to prop it up so that the comb isn't pressing right against anything. You want to allow a little space and it'll fit good enough over the top to allow those bees to emerge. Of course, you'd take out the plug in the inner cover first if you're going to do that. There's a little trick that I use almost never, but you can experiment with it.
This little bees.
Peter has a hive and his bees swarmed earlier this year. He says they're now forming a picket line at the entrance to the hive and they are getting a lot more aggressive. Does he need to requeen?
Okay, so whether you requeen or not will depend on a number of factors. Commercial beekeepers will requeen if they've got a problem with production, or if their hives are really aggressive, or if they've got a routine cycle where they just requeen every 2 years regardless, just to make sure their apiary is performing in peak performance. So for you, if you don't need the extra 5 or 10% of production, then there'll be other reasons why you might decide to requeen. And as you say, if you've got a lot of aggression, and that's bothering you or other people, then that could be an idea to requeen. But if they're performing really well, yes, they are a little bit of aggressive on the entrance side, but that's not bothering anybody, then you can leave them as they are as well, because you can have a hive that's quite aggressive but a really good performer, and it's just whether or not that's causing any problems.
This girl's nearly finished cleaning herself up on my finger. She's still got a little bit of honey.
Eric would like to know what are the best flowers to plant around hives.
So,
like these ones. I'm just going to pop this little girl back. She's not quite cleaned herself up.
So most flowers are good for bees, but if you want to attract some of the, especially the native bee species, these purple flowers do amazing.
Oh yeah, I can't remember their name, but the little TC bees go nuts for them, the little stingless bees.
So basically just plant a whole lot and see what species get attracted in your garden, and there's nearly 20,000 native bee species in the world, so you should see some start to come in.
I tend to go to the nursery and look what the bees are on and take those flowers home. What is?
Salvia.
Salvias.
Oh, salvias, yeah. Look, all sorts of native bees love salvias, and I find that the blue-banded bees, the Australian native buzz pollinator, they love purple flowers. So purple and white, even some weeds. Here's a weed, but it could be bee food. There's flowers at the moment. The dahlias have been a bit active in our garden lately. I've been growing zinnias, calendula. The native bees love the calendula. Lavender. Lavender's a good one. They were on the lavender there before. But yeah, there's lots of lists out there with bee-friendly flowers. But yeah, anything you like, really. Oh, I just saw a little native bee then. Oh, she's gone.
Here we go, Mira the bee spy. She's all...
I don't have my macro lens in my pocket because it's on the camera rig. Nah, she flew off. What was that, Leah?
I was just going to say thanks for answering that. Sharon is asking, how do we control small hive beetle?
Okay, that's a good question. Now, in some areas of the world, you get the little black beetles called the small hive beetles that are opportunistic, and you can get into the situation where your bees are weak, like this hive here. This is a good one that we really need to check in and make sure the hive beetles aren't taking over. And there's a tray down here in the bottom which you can take out and catch beetles. Now, this is needs a bit of a clean out actually, because it's been raining a little bit here and a bit of moisture's come in, and there's actually some evidence of the hive beetle down here in the bottom where you've got, this could be the case, and I hope it's the case, because you can see the hive beetle larvae there.
Oh, you can too.
That they're actually been laid in the tray because there's a bit of moisture that's been collected there. So to ascertain that, we'll need to clean out the tray. But where you've got a hive that's weak, a good idea to put some oil in your tray and trap a whole lot of the beetles. It works quite well, and that's what this tray is about. You've got a screened bottom board up under here that the bees will actually chase the beetles down. Do you want to pop the camera under there and we'll just have a look up through the screen?
Sure.
at the bees, and you'll get the idea.
Can we see?
You can probably turn it over and see what's going on. So there's the screen bottom board, and all the bees are poking their head through, and they'll chase those beetles through that screen.
Sorry if that made anyone seasick.
So yeah, so if you're using this pest management tray, then you need to clean it out from time to time, and it gives you an idea of what's going on in your hive as well, a bit of early warning signs if you have any beetle infestations. And also people use it for checking on mite levels when they do their sugar shakes and things. I'm not an expert in that because luckily we don't have those pesky varroa mites here in Australia.
Oh, so lucky. I did 3 seasons with them and they're quite challenging.
Yes.
Oh look, they're chewing back the capping already on that one.
Oh yeah, look at that. That's cool. So the bees have noticed that there's been a disturbance under their feet, and they're getting in there and chewing away the capping, and in a day or two they would have chewed that all away, repaired all the cells, and the whole process starts again.
Go bees.
Isabella's wondering, what does it mean when there are dead white dead baby bees around the entrance of the hive?
Okay, that could mean a few things. So it means for some reason they're ejecting the brood, and there's a bunch of reasons why that could happen. One is they're stressed for some reason. I've had the situation where I've been carting bees around for show and tells, and that's caused stress, and they've ejected a bunch of brood. You can get into the situation where there is an issue with the larvae, and there's a whole lot of reasons why that could happen as well. And you could also what other reasons are they? The hive beetle could be one. So sometimes those larvae, which we were just showing you before, can worm their way through the brood. And
Whoops, got a bee in my hair.
Mira's just getting a bee out of her hair. There we go. And so you can get into a situation where they've damaged the brood, and if damaged brood will get ejected from the hive. So it's hard to know. Keep an eye on it, see if it keeps happening. And if you have a look at the baby white larvae and realise that bits of them are missing, then it probably, and it could be the beetle issue, which also check your tray underneath if you've got a tray to see if there's any signs of beetle infestation. And you might want to, if there is signs of that, then you'll need to get onto it, trapping those beetles. And if it's getting to the advanced point where there's slime and stuff happening on the frames, then you'll need to take away the super and take away any frames of pollen and honey on the edge, reduce it down and give your bees just the minimum area to look after. Great question.
Awesome. Neil is in Forbes, New South Wales, and he picked up his Nuke last night. He's wondering how long should he leave them in the box before he transfers them?
So it's up to you. You can. They would have been in the Nuke for a while, and you can just leave them in there, but make sure they're not getting too hot, especially this time of year. You're going to want to keep them shaded somehow. So give them some extra shade, because nukes can melt down on a very hot summer's day. And just watch them building up. You don't want to get into the situation where the bees are kind of overflowing and really need that extra room. So the answer is just if you have to, you could leave them for weeks, but transfer them when you've got time into a bigger box so you can look after them and then they'll grow.
Fantastic. Margie has a hibiscus tree in her garden that's starting to grow over the side of the hive, and she's wondering if it's better to have the bushes away from the hive.
You can have the bushes near the hive and touching the hive. The only thing is if ants start to annoy you, you might like to cut the foliage back so it's not touching the hive. We haven't done that here. The ants aren't annoying us at the moment, but if we get a lot of ants moving in behind the covers, which happens sometimes, particularly in the wet times, then you'll cut the foliage back and create some kind of ant barrier, or perhaps you've got our ant barriers on our Flow Hive 2+2 here. You can see you can fill them up with oil or grease, and provided that the ants don't have another pathway like this foliage here, that'll work nicely as an ant barrier.
Sharon's got a bit of a tricky question. She had an experience where the flow went to a gooey slurry of honey and wax. She says it's coming good now, but what happened?
Gooey slurry of honey and wax. Wow, that's unusual. Normally the honey just comes straight out like this, and it's quite free from any wax. Occasionally you'll get kind of little flakes of wax that are joining the cell parts, but normally it's like that. So be interested to know what that's about. Perhaps when maybe check the trough area for some build up. Sometimes in here these all look nice and clean, but if you take out this area here, sometimes you can get a bit of build up of honey that could go candied. They could come out in a kind of a globule fashion. Sometimes the bees, as they're repairing the cells from the last harvest, they'll drop a whole lot of wax through into this area. So that could be what happened. Perhaps the trough was full of a bit of partially candied honey and wax from before that came out into your jar. But yeah, let me know how it goes and whether it persists at all.
Definitely get in and have a look at the hive if you're having that issue.
Yes, and Sharon, if this happens again, please just send in some photos. Customer support are here to help.
Awesome, Leah.
Kat would like to know, do the bees always cap from the central cells, or is it intermittent?
So generally when they're filling, they'll start fairly central and work out to the extremities of the hive, but bees will be bees and they'll always defy what the rule books say.
Which is probably why when you ask 2 beekeepers you get 3 different opinions.
Exactly. So generally they start from the centre and move out, but when they're hungry they might start eating from the extremities but also eating from the centre. So that can create a pattern that's a bit higgledy-piggledy across the comb with bits eaten out. So yeah, observing what's going on and noticing whether they're hungry or whether they're filling will give you a good idea of when it's time to harvest or not. Here it's not really time to harvest, we're only doing it for show and tell, but you can see there was a nice amount of honey in that frame regardless, and we could see that through the side window, so we decided to harvest that and we'll leave the rest for the bees because we can see that this particular hive is on the bounce back from a bit of a low in numbers issue.
Nils has 2 flow hives and one hive has swarmed. He says there's still around 20 bees in it. What should he do?
Oh, one hive has swarmed and there's only 20 bees left. If there are only 20 bees left, they're likely just to be stragglers or robbers coming in. So 20 bees isn't enough for a colony at all. So you'll probably find that you'll need to pack up that hive, get a new colony and reintroduce it. Once you've got a new colony, or take a split when it's appropriate from your other hive to restart it. Have a good look to see, it's actually called an abscond when all the bees nick off, which they do sometimes, but it's rare. And basically they abscond, leaving very few bees behind.
They usually abscond when there's another issue has happened quite often. That you know, the queen, they've needed to requeen and they've failed to raise a new queen, and then the numbers drop because they don't have the brood, and then, yeah, usually absconding seems to be because of something. Oop, another bee.
Bee in the hair.
Bee in the hair.
Okay, these bees are getting a little bit tough.
Bees in the hair.
Yeah, we need to stand back. We've got one little grumpy hive here.
We do have one little grumpy hive.
We need to take care of.
We could have a look at these bees for a minute. Hopefully they're not as grumpy. Or are they the grumpy hive?
No, these bees are friendly. These are the ones we did that beautiful cascade harvest the other day.
Getting a bit buzzed by bees.
So we got time for one more question.
Okay, John said, but what happens when the bees forage on other properties where they use pesticides?
That's a good question, and really a problem of the way we do our agriculture and our society in general. So you can get into the issue where you can actually get a pesticide kill, and that's really unfortunate if you see that. Typically what happens, and you hear of it happening from time to time, is insecticide gets sprayed onto flowers, and if they haven't sprayed them at the right time is when the bees aren't foraging, if there is a right time. And what can happen is the bees can return to the hive but then actually die, and you'll see them with a carpet of bees out the front with their tongues hanging out, and that's a sign of a pesticide kill. But yeah, it's typical to see a bunch of bees out the front, but like, you know, half the hive, like thousands and thousands out the front, is what can happen if the bees get a dose of insecticide from foraging on flowers that have been sprayed. So it's really unfortunate, and something we all need to do as beekeepers is just make people aware that, hey, look, if you have to spray insecticides, then make sure you're following the rules. There are rules around it so that your bees aren't likely to forage on insecticide when it's active. and it's great. We get customers that are out there suddenly realising the importance of that and rallying and turning their whole neighbourhood into an insecticide-free zone, which is really important for not only our European honeybees that do so much foraging for us, but also for the myriad of native bees that are really our unsung heroes of our world. Without the native bee species and all of our pollinators, then we're really in trouble. So it's up to us as, I guess, humanity to really change the way we do our farming practices, the way we do our agriculture, and make sure we're being supportive so we can be sustainable. The very meaning of sustainable is that we can sustain and go on doing what we're doing forever. And to do that, we're going to need to learn from our mistakes. And one of those mistakes is the billion litres of insecticide that gets sprayed onto our Earth's surface each year. So I'm also very aware that we need to support our farmers because they're feeding us. So it's learning and changing our ways and seeing how we can learn from what's happened in the past and do better. We have a program called Bee Friendly Farming, which is all about that. And we've got stuff on our website, and also you can sign up if you're not a farmer, but even just to have your area registered as a bee-friendly garden. So you can do it in your backyard, you can do it if you're a farmer, you can let people know that perhaps you've got friends who have got big farms and doing their agriculture, and you can say, hey, have you thought about becoming a bee-friendly farm? Which is aimed at helping people change over to being supportive to all of our pollinators that really make our world go round. Thank you very much for tuning in and asking all your great questions. If you'd like us to cover something specific next week, then let us know. Otherwise, tune in, same time, same place, and we'll have something interesting to show you.
Thanks. Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
for watching, and thanks to my sister Mira, who's been doing a great job answering questions